Hey guys, Wyatt Claypool here. Going into the final week of Canada's federal election, it's clear to me that Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives have the momentum. Now, I don't know if it's enough momentum or they have enough time left to cross the finish line and win the plurality of seats in this election, but at the very least, I rate this entire thing as a big coin toss. It's a coin toss between a liberal minority or a conservative minority. Maybe one's a little bit more likely than the other, but I don't want to endlessly speculate about that. At the very least, I would say that Mark Carney and the Liberals seem to agree with me, because Mark Carney is getting very arrogant and uppity again at his own press conferences when he is given mildly challenging questions. It reminds me of the start of the federal campaign where he had that really weird exchange with Rosemary Barton when she, a liberal ally who worked for the CBC, just asked him about his investments and a potential conflict of interest, which every journalist was asking him about because it was a hot topic. And he came to her and answered as, Rosemary, look inside yourself. I don't know what I did to you in order to deserve this animus from you. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but it was like a really condescending and arrogant non answer from him to dodge what was a perfectly legitimate question about his assets. But now he's doing the same thing. You can tell that the Conservatives and Bloc are gaining on the Liberals and things are getting uncomfortable because Mark Carney does not work well under pressure. So before I play this clip right here, I'm going to give you a bit of context. But before the context, guys, if you like my channel, if you've been liking my federal election coverage, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel if you are not yet a subscriber, and leave a comment on what you think about the topic of the day. So the context here is yesterday, Trevor Tombe, an economist I know personally, he is not a conservative, ran a piece talking about how Mark Carney's budget plan and the massive amount of new spending is going to put Canada in a really bad place debt-wise, and that a lot of the budget didn't really make much sense. He's adding $130 billion of new spending, but then he says that he can somehow find 28 billion of that new spending in efficiencies in the government, which he doesn't explain how he's going to do at all, and that Trevor Tombe, when he runs the numbers, shows Canada gaining like almost a $500 billion in new debt over the next few years. Very sober, very objective analysis. Again, Trevor Tombe is even someone who defended the carbon tax. This is not somebody from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. This is somebody who, I don't know how he votes, but is somebody who's not anti-liberal exactly. And when asked about this analysis by Trevor Tombe, Mark Carney gives one of the most nasty answers I've ever seen, like as if Trevor Tombe stood up in front of him and started attacking him over his platform. Trevor Tombe wasn't here, he's an economist. A journalist was just asking him about the analysis, and Carney's answer is basically, I'm smarter than Trevor Tombe. This guy, an oil exec on X, says Mark Carney continues to clash with the media who dared to criticize his plan that would increase Canada's debt to record high levels, in comparison to the CPC plan to aggressively slash it. Literally, he says, Trevor Tombe is wrong. I have more experience than he does. Now, this clip is going to open up with a French reporter in the middle of asking him this question. And he, again, is just going to dismiss it by effectively saying, I'm smarter than Trevor Tombe. You know, my dad could beat up Trevor Toombs' dad. This is the prime minister.
So Trevor Tombe is wrong, in your opinion? Yes. I have more experience than he does, and it's important to state that.
Barry with CBC. I'd like to follow up on that. Just if you've got an economist like Trevor Tombe saying that your plan is unsustainable, is just that. Is there an argument that if Pierre Poilievre is trying to bring down spending, bring down the deficit, that his plan is more fiscally responsible than yours?
Okay. There's one thing that you can write on a paper. There's another thing that will happen in the economy. Okay. So our plan, to be clear, is focused on investment and growing this economy. All of the spending, all of the investment in years 3 and 4 are for growing the economy.
But that's the same thing that the Liberals have been running on. In fact, Polyv today at his own platform announcement called out Carney for literally just running on what the Liberals gave him to run on. That was something, it's hilarious that this is actually something that somebody on the CBC admitted was the Justin Trudeau 2025 platform, and they basically just Command F'd Justin Trudeau's name out and replaced it with Mark Carney. There is literally nothing different than what Justin Trudeau would have been doing. And so, yeah, like this is just not a very good look for Mark Carney. You're going to be talking down to people. Here's another clip of him that Dan Manzer, a conservative MP, posted this morning, which I'm going to allow his description to characterize it. Dan says here, bombshell audio, Carney pretends to be a climate crusader, but behind closed doors, it's all about making money. In Undercover audio, Mark Carney admits that massive institutions like his firm Brookfield are promoting radical net zero policies not to save the planet, but to, quote, to make a lot of money off of this, unquote. Want more proof it's all about making money? Carney quietly moved $30 billion in so-called green funds to offshore tax havens to avoid paying Canadian taxes. He has no issue padding his pockets and sending Canadians the bill. We cannot afford a fourth term of high prices. But I want to jump down to the audio because there is that oozing contempt that Mark Carney seems to have for normal people that I think bleeds through a lot in clips like this.
Stood up and said, we're going to manage to net zero by 2050. Actually, we're going to have specific targets by 2025 and 2030, so you can measure the short term. They don't say this quite as loudly, but what they're also saying and thinking, and we're going to make a lot of money off of this because actually this is the way the world's headed. I mean, I'm not sure exactly when we get there, but to be carbon competitive is going to be value creating.
In the context here is that Mark Carney is specifically, he's not talking about this is the way the world's moving organically. He's saying this is what the government's doing. So if you're a big institution like Brookfield and you're investing in things that the liberals are pumping up, you could make a lot of money. And we don't say this out loud because obviously that's a pretty nasty thing to imply that you don't actually believe the things you're doing are helping. You don't care. It's just that your institution, by altering the market and being already ready there to capture all that subsidized money, is going to make a lot out of all this. That is pretty horrible. That's pretty horrific. In a second here, I want to jump over as well to just some of the liberals' marketing. I did this yesterday, but I want to do it again today. I find it so obnoxious how the liberals are effectively running a campaign of just not obviously lying. It's generic to say that the other guys are lying, but it's just the least charitable interpretation of their opponent. The conservatives don't need to do this. The conservatives can actually point to policy failures. The liberals are running advertisements like this.
I'm Bill Blair, the former chief of the Toronto Police Service. Conservative politicians always talk about getting tough on crime, but Pierre Polyv, the leader of the Conservative Party, has done absolutely nothing to get guns off of our streets. In fact, he's promised the gun lobby he'll bring back assault rifles, and he wants to give us American-style gun laws. Canada is not America. I'm with Mark Carney. His party's...
What is he talking about? The Liberals passed Bill C-5, a piece of legislation not as many people usually talk about, but it lowered the actual sentences for gangbangers caught carrying illegal handguns. Illegal, smuggled over the border handguns. You were now given basically a slap on the wrist, like maybe a year in prison at most, for carrying an illegal handgun and being part of a gang. And the Liberals are going to try and cast aspersions at Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives because they want to let gun owners who went through to get their possession and acquisition license, their weapons back. Well, yeah. Well, the Liberal government hasn't actually taken any yet because even they know that this is ballot box poison overall, and that's why they like to campaign on doing it, but they don't actually like to do it because as soon as you do it, I think a lot of Canadians who are even maybe in favor of gun control would realize, yeah, going after Farmer Joe for owning a shotgun that looks scary is completely ridiculous. People who own guns legally are 1/3 as likely to commit a violent crime as the average Canadian. If anything, I would love to promote people in high school getting a PAL or an RPAL because it would actually increase their level of awareness of how being a responsible citizen entails. Because as soon as you get your PAL, you can absolutely not get caught with a DUI. You cannot commit any violent offense. You can't steal because you will lose your license. I think that rights are pair very well with responsibilities. And I think getting a PAL increases your responsibilities and it makes you value your rights more. And it also makes society safer if we have more people who are law-abiding gun owners who can, prevent people from stealing their SUV by breaking into their house to steal the keys, which again, liberal officials in Toronto tell you to just let happen. That's how ridiculous things are right now. But I find this just obnoxious. Oh, the Conservatives are going to put more guns back on the streets. Really? Really? Is that where PAL holders were carrying their rifles, was just through the streets of Toronto? No, it's ridiculous.
Stopped the sale of handguns and has banned assault rifles in Canada. Mark Carney wants to keep our streets safe. And that's how we keep Canada strong.
Violent crime under the Liberals, overall across the country, is up 30%. In certain provinces, it's above 50%. And these people are going to be like, we took guns off the streets. We're trying to make Canadian streets safer. Well, you failed. And again, even though he was the economic advisor for 5 straight years, did he ever raise a little bit of protest over the criminal justice policies? He still hasn't. He's not actually planning on repealing anything like Bill C-75 that has differential sentencing based on ethnic background that it instructs judges to use. Insane. We should not have DEI sentencing for criminals. If anything, if you're concerned about racism in the criminal justice system, you should be more concerned about the fact that if you don't lock up criminals, they will go back to their own communities and victimize those people. Because most people who commit violent offenses committed against people who are like themselves. So saying well, we can't lock up X person from X community because that could be seen as an offense against the community. Really? Locking up a criminal from that community is worse than letting that person do whatever they want in that community? Knock over liquor stores, assault people, steal purses from old women? Really? Well, now I just want to jump over to this other post that the Liberals made trying to criticize the Conservative platform. Now, I wish the Conservative platform had been more hawkish in a lot of areas, been more focused on cuts, or been more, more hawkish when it comes to cutting taxes or other sort of policy areas. Maybe I think they went a bit mild. But at the very least, the Liberals' criticism makes no sense. They say, the Liberal Party says, a tale of 2 tax cuts. Pierre Polyv has quietly walked back to his own promise, delivering less for Canadians for the next 2 years, as we heard as we head into an economic crisis. No, he did not. He didn't walk any promise back. He said he was going to cut taxes under $100,000 or whatever by 15%. He is still doing that. He is just phasing it in over 4 years because having a 15% loss in tax revenue in that lower bracket all at once can make it harder to actually get your deficits under control. The Liberals, as you can see here, their tax plan phases in right away here. Look, there's costs more in the first year because they're cutting more in the first year. Yeah, but then it flatlines. They're cutting 1% off of the Conservative plan actually takes 2.25% of your taxes off of the first 100,000 or whatever, whereas the Liberals take 1% off. So they're celebrating that technically in the first year, theirs one looks better. Okay, but are they not just telling on themselves that they value short-term over long-term? Because I care more what my taxes look like in 5 years and making it actually consistent rather than do I get another $200 back next year. I would rather get less money back next year, but in the long run, I'm saving $1,500 in my taxes rather than the Liberals just giving me $500 off now and that's it. Regardless, though. Okay, I want to move on to actually a couple other issues, some more side issues here. One, polls are actually looking quite good for the Conservatives. Now, I think the Conservatives are still being underestimated in the polls. When a poll comes out and the Conservatives are at 37 or 38%, I tend to doubt it. The Conservatives have gained a lot of support since 2021. I don't think they're only going to be doing 3% better than Aaron O'Toole had done. And so, but the thing is I want to talk about is how the Bloc Québécois are doing. So the Bloc Québécois are very key to the Conservative victory here, and they seem to also be underestimated by the pollsters, probably for different reasons than the Conservatives are. Conservatives have a lot of rural supporters who don't tend to take a lot of polls, which artificially makes it look like the Conservatives are going to do less well nationally. You can see this effect happening in Saskatchewan's provincial election, a very rural province, and all of the pollsters pretty much missed the popular vote. In fact, actually, they all did. Some of them thought the Saskatchewan party was going to win the popular vote, but they assumed that they would win by like 3. Some of them assumed that the NDP in Saskatchewan were going to win by like 2 to 5, when in fact the Saskatchewan party won by 12. It was insane. And so I think that is going on to a lesser extent in Canada nationally, because obviously Canada as a whole is less rural than Saskatchewan as a singular province, but I could assume that the Conservatives may be underestimated by 2.5 points. So if you see them at 38.5 or 38, they're probably at 40.5 or 41. But here is the Bloc Québécois on 338 Canada now for this riding of L'Épée something Haute. I cannot pronounce French names. I am just way too English. But right here on 338 Canada, their projection for this riding that currently there is not an incumbent running for has the Bloc at 39% projected to get and the Liberals at 36%. Now, that's good for the Conservatives because it denies the Liberals a seat on the outskirts of Montreal. But I want to show you the actual poll result that Main Street had specifically for this riding. They did a poll only of that riding on the outskirts of Montreal. And that poll found that the Bloc is actually leading by more than the 338 average assumes. And I assume that this is even underestimating them a bit because I do not think the PPC is going to get 4% around the Montreal area. They tend to do even worse than 1% in most Quebec ridings. And the Conservatives are probably going to be voting for the Bloc as well. But the Bloc Québécois in this riding, based on the numbers from Main Street, are leading 37 to 31 over the Liberals. That is a 6-point lead, which is double what the 338 average is currently assuming. If this holds up over the other Montreal suburbs off of the island of Montreal, we could see the Liberals not gain anything in Quebec over what they had in 2021. In fact, they actually may lose support because although their overall support in the province has risen, it just means that they're winning ridings they used to get 50% in with 60% of the vote. It is basically the same thing that often happens to the Conservatives in places like Battle River, Crowfoot, or Slave Lake. You end up going from 65% of the vote to 75%, and it doesn't actually make a national difference that you ended up winning that riding by massive margins all the way up to pure dictatorship margins because people like the Conservatives so much in rural areas of Alberta. And when I say the Liberals may even lose seats, it's because specific ridings in Montreal do not like the Liberals anymore, like Mount Royal, which has a heavy Jewish population who is very unimpressed with the enabling of anti-Semitism from the Liberal government, both in terms of Middle Eastern issues, as well as letting Hamas protesters run rampant all over Canada and block roads in Jewish neighborhoods. It's ridiculous. I was in a more heavily Jewish neighborhood around the Ottawa area, and it is actually surprising how forward people are from the Jewish community on bringing that up. That is a top of mind issue, just how much seething contempt the Liberal Party has had for Jewish people over the last few years and the sort of patting on the head they have for the Hamas activists. So that is one issue. Now I want to bring up another one. And this one is silly. I'm going to be very frank. This is a silly issue. I just want to kind of end on here. Or we're not going to end on it, but a side thing before I just sort of talk about some very minor posts. Guys, the left doesn't understand what a right is. And we're going to be talking about this Frank Dominic video at the end here. He's talking about an injunction that was made against Doug Ford trying to get rid of bike lanes in Toronto. Not all of them, but getting rid of bike lanes that have been holding up traffic and making the city just be full of traffic congestion all day long. I don't even like Doug Ford, but this is a common sense move for him to be making. But Frank Dominic here thinks that this is actually very good, that you can file a charter challenge against removing bike lanes and the court will give an injunction. This is insane.
The courts have blocked Doug Ford from removing the bike lanes in Toronto. Now, mind you, this is just temporary, but essentially the courts are saying that Doug Ford has to wait until it's played out in the courts before he can actually remove them, because there is currently a charter challenge on the removal of the bike lanes.
What is your charter right to a bike lane? Like, what is it? I don't understand.
While this doesn't indicate what the outcome of that case will be, it is a good sign for people who are in favor of bike lanes in Toronto. Now, mind you, Doug Ford can just throw all of this out the window by reinstituting the bill with the notwithstanding clause included. So the question is whether or not Doug Ford wants to take the political hit on this or not. No.
That would not be a political hit for Doug Ford. Again, I don't even like Doug Ford. He would only be gaining support by doing this. People don't like bike lanes. The only people who like bike lanes are people who are either that very tiny minority of people who actually ride their bikes, or the people who would like to think that I'm going to start riding my bike to work next week and they never actually do it. This is a popular issue, getting rid of bike lanes to make the cities less congested. And for some reason, Frank here thinks it's like, this is a good thing for people who support bike lanes. Like, I guess it's wild to me that this guy who's a teacher just has it kind of fly over his head that maybe it's a bad thing for courts to give injunctions against legislation for charter challenges that don't make sense. This is the same person who'd probably be mocking people who are against lockdowns and mandates for filing charter challenges in courts to get injunctions against mandates for vaccines that you just did not need. But no, it's fine if the bike people do it.
Now, do I think that it's rational for him to use the notwithstanding clause on bike lanes of all things? No. But this is Doug Ford we're talking about.
No, it's irrational for the courts to do this. Doug Ford shouldn't have to use the notwithstanding clause. I would encourage him to do it. Hopefully Doug Ford is not a coward like he usually is. But no, it's not. Doug Ford would be using the notwithstanding clause against bike lanes. How petty. No. How petty of the court to put an injunction in place for something like this. How dare they?
As being rational ever prevented him or pushed him towards doing anything. Mr. Business over there claims to be rational, but rationality has not been the core competency of his government. Mind you, I don't think his government has any competencies to begin with. Maybe rationality is his core incompetency. Anyway, if you want to stay updated on this, hit the like and follow buttons.
Yeah, and he just goes into just random attacks on Doug Ford, and I'm fine with pure random attacks on Doug Ford, but make them make sense. Oh, Doug Ford doesn't have any competency, or he's not rational because he wants to get rid of bike lanes that nobody really uses, that absolutely slows down traffic in the city of Toronto. I support getting rid of them. Get rid of them. No, you don't have a right to sometimes ride a bike because you like it. If it slows down traffic for everybody, isn't it public good to get rid of the bike lanes? This is where the left doesn't understand the difference, like what right and freedom is. They don't think that you have a freedom to not be locked down in your house, or to refuse a vaccine that there's just no medical evidence that you absolutely need in any way. Like, you just did not need the COVID vaccine to survive in everyday life. That you don't have the right to refuse those things, but you do have the right to a bike lane, especially in the winter when nobody absolutely needs it, but for some reason they still clear the bike lanes, even if it's covered in snow, or you would never even think about riding a bike at that time. Stupid. Just absolutely stupid. Now, in Polyev's platform today, he made this is a really good point that was made, that we need to eliminate the need for university degrees to work in the federal government. There are so many departments where it's not required to have a university degree. It's probably a good thing not to have one. Just show up when you're 19 years old and learn the trade of that federal department. You don't need to sit through anthropology classes to work in the federal government. And I find it so telling that this is the take that somebody like Chantal Hubert had when Polyv had announced this. She says, apparently Canada's public service is overeducated, so the Conservatives, per their costed platform, promised to eliminate university degree requirements for most federal public service roles to hire for skill, not credentials. Yes. Based. Good. Yes. Get rid of stupid degrees. Guys, most people in liberal arts, and I'm speaking as someone who took 2 degrees in liberal arts, are not more qualified for a federal job than somebody who just got into it because they wanted to. In fact, you probably have more skill if you're somebody who has the confidence to just apply without the degree. I trust you more than the person who felt like they needed 4 years of sociology in order to work in that federal department. Obviously, some federal jobs should require a degree. If you work in finance, you probably should have an accounting degree, something in economics, whatever, public finance. That's fine. But if you're working in Veterans Affairs, why do you need a degree? If you're working in some of these other ones where it's culture, why do you need a degree to work in culture? You need a hospitality degree to work in culture? No, just start working there and you'll eventually have all the skills you need in a very short period of time. I think that, in fact, a lot of these university programs that people take make them dumber. Don't hire people with degrees in certain areas. Oh, my goodness. And then here is actually one other thing I wanted to pull up, and this was from Polyev's announcement today. And I thought this was just generally a pretty good moment where he goes over, I believe this is the clip where he talks about the Prime Minister, the PBO report on just how bad, or the Privy Council office has made some pretty crazy predictions of how bad Canada is going to be, or what the shape of the country in 2020, 2040. And he delivered this today, and I thought this was just a really good moment for him that he needs to put out there.
So Mr. Carney has the same Liberal MPs, same Liberal ministers, same Liberal platform, and you will get the same disastrous Liberal results. And it is a very dangerous future if the Liberals get their fourth term. And this isn't just my words. It's Mark Carney's own government department. Just a week ago, we learned that one of the departments of the government, the Privy Council office, has made some very depressing predictions about the way the country is headed after a decade of Liberal rule. I'm going to quote directly from this Privy Council report. In 2040, upward mobility is almost unheard of in Canada, they predict. Hardly anyone believes they can build a better life for themselves or their children through their own efforts, and many worry about sliding down the social order. It forecasts more people may struggle to afford rent, bills, and groceries. Resulting stress could worsen mental health challenges. This would increase demand for social services. And then there's some specific forecasts that the current Liberal government is making about our future. In 2040, owning a home is not a realistic goal for many. Inequality between those who rent and those who own has become a key driver of social, economic, and political conflict. The report goes on to say that people may lose faith in the Canadian project altogether. It forecasts that many will leave the country to avoid this rising cost and declining opportunity. And they believe that it will lead to a mental health crisis. More people will emigrate to jurisdictions where they believe upward mobility and or higher standards of living are easier to obtain. Quote, if young workers leave Canada, it may become harder to pay for the systems that support a growing number of older people. It says things are so bad that, and this is a quote, I'm quoting from the government here. If I had said this myself, you would have thought it was outlandish, but this is the government's own predictions about how bad things are headed right now. People may start to hunt, fish, and forage on public lands and waterways because they can't afford groceries anymore.
The Conservatives should be cutting this into an advertisement, especially on platforms that a lot of younger people use. That is incredible. That is an actual office from the Prime Minister's, like that is like a department within the Prime Minister's office who has filed a report basically saying things are going to look like, literally as Polyv said, it's going to look like Fallout or The Last of Us by 2040 in certain aspects. You know, people are going to be like, you know, pairing off to go try and hunt deer in order so that they can fill their freezer with some cheaper food that they didn't have to purchase. Wild. And the thing is, like, this is all going on and the regular media doesn't cover it. This report has been out for a few days and CBC doesn't report on it. No, not from the Globe and Mail, not from the Toronto Star. Obviously, you'll get like the Sun or the National Post to say something in the alternative media, but so many people live in a bubble where they don't hear this stuff. They don't hear how bad things are. Tristan Hopper, I need to go get that book that he's put out. He worked for the National Post. I think it was the book, his title is called Don't Be Like Canada. And it's all about just all the terrible things going on in Canada. And that he's talked to people, or I think through some sort of process, seen that Canadians will hear about the same type of news stories going on in other countries, which are actually not as bad as the current state of Canada. They'll be like, wow, that place is such a hole. I can't believe anyone would tolerate that. And a worse version of that same thing is going on here. People just don't know or care about it. It's wild just how much the government can get away with in Canada. And there's this kind of boring normality in Canada that goes on, that complaining is for Americans. Let's not say anything bad about how our government's performing. Elbows up, guys. My goodness. So anyways, that should be it for me today, guys. If you like my coverage of the federal election, as I said at the beginning of the video, make sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe if you're not a subscriber, and leave a comment on the topic of the day. how you think the federal election is going to go. Have you been able to convert any people from voting Liberal to Conservative? I would love to hear that from you guys. And I will see you guys later.